We're in the third and final week of a teaching series that we are calling the Christian Life of Community, and we're looking at the kinds of communities that God has called His people to invest themselves in. Have you ever found yourself in a room or at a table and wondered just for a moment how you got there? I don't mean like when you zone out on your walk home or when you get lost inside of a Canadian Tire. It's not like that. I mean the moments when you take a step back for a minute, just in awe of the place where you are, and you think, how did I get here? Let me give you an example. We have two daughters. They are 4 and 6 years old. And there are times when we are plowing through life with our heads down, just getting through one moment to the next, because just like you, I'm sure, life is full of commitments and responsibilities. But there are other times when I find myself maybe sitting at the kitchen table for dinner, listening to these two little people chatter away, and I go, how did I get here? Just in awe that I would be the person who gets to shepherd them and lead them through life as they experience what it is to be human for the first time. So I'll ask you again, have you ever found yourself in a moment or in a place and wondered how you got there? Maybe it's looking around at your friends and you think, boy, I am so blessed that these people love me. Maybe it's when you're at work and you think, wow, this is a really great team. We're doing good work here. Maybe it's when you look at your family and you think, who am I that God would bless me with this life? Some people would count that down to luck, but we know better than that. Think of the best people in your circles. Nobody could be that lucky. But God could love you that much that He would bring you into relationship with those people in this season of your life. God doesn't only call us to be in relationship with Him. He calls us into relationship with others. He calls us into a place of community where we can belong and we can be strengthened by other people. Consider what Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 4. He says, therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. What does it look like? It looks like this. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you've been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and through all. So often we frame the idea of calling as being about what we do, called to lead or called to teach or called to whatever. But calling is about who we are as the people of God. We're called to belong to Him, and in belonging to Him, we also belong to one another. This passage shows us how to be as we live out that calling, how to relate to each other, how to protect and safeguard our unity. It's not luck that puts us into the circles and the spaces that make us feel so lucky. It's God's providence in our lives to bring us into spaces where we are loved and cared for. How would your perspective change if you looked at the people around you in your life and considered, God has called me to belong to these people? Wow, what a privilege. Many of us have convinced ourselves that our singular individual journey with God is our highest priority, and that being part of a community is like an optional add-on for those who might need it. I'm here to tell you today, as a bona fide, documented, and severe introvert, that belonging to community is not an optional add-on. It's part of the full expression of the new life that God has granted to us. Our spiritual life is incomplete without investing in and being invested in by the community of faith. God calls His people together, and He does it with intentionality and design. Recall what Paul teaches in 1 Corinthians 12, where he uses the analogy of the body to talk about the family of God. He says, but our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where He wants it. How strange a body would be if it only had one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. When we're in Christ, we are made for each other. The church is designed to work together as one. Each person brings something unique and distinct to the family of God that's important for the church to function well. Look around your table. Look around this room. Look at the diversity that is represented here. Different perspectives, stories, giftings, backgrounds. What a gift from God to belong to a family like this, where we can experience both the strength that comes from diversity and the unity of faith that binds us all together. A church family, a family of faith, is another circle that keeps us on mission, growing and moving forward. And that's the expression of community that we're going to focus on today. We're not made to go it alone. So how did you get here? No church family is perfect. And just like every other church community, our community is made up of people who are all on a journey back to God. We experience both the joys and the challenges that come from walking with one another and belonging with one another as we go through life. We're called together as the church, and part of our experience of the fullness of new life that God has for us is to belong to a family. I wonder what you picture when I say that, a family of faith. I wonder what your experience of community has been in your life. Some of us have been part of a church community for a long time, and some of us are very new to this kind of experience. So I wonder what this conversation is bringing up for you. Maybe you're thinking about the kinds of communities that you've been part of in your life. There are lots of different things that can bind us together and unite us, lots of ways that people will put themselves into groups. We can find a community around a shared passion like music or sports, something that we love to do. We can find ourselves in community by proximity too, in the places that we live. In your neighborhood, the places that you go often, the grocery store that you visit, the coffee shop that you use. It feels good to find somebody that you share something in common with. Someone you can talk to about a shared passion or project. Someone who's excited when you share the Excel spreadsheet that you built instead of rolling their eyes at you. It's natural for humans to put themselves into groups. We are wired for connection. We do it all the time. And in this day and age, we have a huge selection of connection opportunities to choose from. We can go online. We can find hundreds of opportunities to sign up for. So in a culture where we have endless choices on how to design our lives, we can be deceived into thinking of church as something we can elect to sign up for when it benefits us and choose to walk away from and leave when it no longer benefits us. We have to be careful not to lump our participation in a church community into the same category as being part of a social group or an organization. This space isn't about pursuing a shared interest. It's not even about what's most convenient for us or what fits our season of life best. Look at the picture of the church that we get in Scripture in Acts chapter 2. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day, the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. There are spaces in our world that we engage with seasonally, for a time, while it works, when it serves us. But this isn't a picture of a social group that we can float in and out of. We can build communities out of shared interests and pursuits, but the church family isn't about a shared interest. It's about a shared identity. What binds us together is the shared recognition that it's in Christ that we live and we move and we have our being. That we have been called by God, that He has called each of us His own, and that He has made us into brothers and sisters by virtue of the fact that we've been adopted into His family through Jesus. We're brought into relationship with God through Christ, and we're called the children of God, connected as brothers and sisters, and that's a beautiful thing. Recognizing a shared identity, the church devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to sharing in meals, and to prayer. As they sought to know God more through connecting with Him and learning, the natural outflow was a deepening relationship with each other. As their relationship with God grew deeper, their connections with each other grew stronger. They gathered together, not out of obligation, but by choice, enjoying each other's company, sharing joyfully, connecting over meals, just in awe of what God was doing among them. They sacrificed for one another. They were willing to be inconvenienced, to go without, to have less themselves for the benefit of a brother or a sister. So I'll ask us to consider this. In an age that prioritizes convenience, are we willing to be inconvenienced for the purpose of connecting with and serving others in the family of faith? Do we allow the sound of our own preferences to drown out the sacrifices that God is calling us to make for each other? Do we recognize our shared identity? That we are called to belong to others in our church family because we've been made into a family through Christ. The picture of the early church is one of love and commitment. It's not just a bond through shared interests or even values, but through a shared identity. We've been looking at instances from David's life throughout this teaching series. We looked at the model of his friendship with Jonathan. It was a friendship that prioritized God's kingdom and their roles within it over any earthly kingdom. Last week, we discussed how those closest to David served and defended him, and how this small group of men played a pivotal role in challenging seasons of David's life. And today, as we talk about belonging to a family of faith, we're going to look at 2 Samuel chapter 5 for a picture of what it looks like for God's people to commit to one another. David was identified by God and anointed through Samuel to be Israel's next king when he was a teenager. But it would be 15 years before that calling was realized in his life. You can read through the book of 1 Samuel for all that David went through in that season, fleeing from Saul, leading his men, trusting in God for every next decision and every next step. All the while knowing that he was called by God for a specific role, but it wasn't yet time for him to step into it. Saul was Israel's king, and David trusts in God's timing to bring about in the perfect time what Samuel had anointed him for. Then, both Saul and Jonathan die in battle, and everything changes. First, the men of Judah come to David and they anoint him to be their king, while the rest of Israel installs Saul's son to be their king. And David is king over Judah for 7.5 years, while those who are loyal to David and those who are loyal to Saul begin to wage war on one another. There was division and civil war in the nation as each tribe grappled for what was supposed to come next. They lost sight of unity and oneness. They lost sight of who they were in the eyes of God, his people called for his purposes. As we talk about God's design for his church, our study of this story today reminds us that we are committed to this family because of God. Some of us might be hesitant to commit to a church family because we foresee the challenges. We see different perspectives, different approaches. We foresee the potential for dissension and maybe even for drama. We foresee the human part, but in doing that, we neglect the God part. The model of building a family of faith that we see here was that the people made a covenant with God and under God to be united and to belong to one another. The model wasn't unity because of proximity or even a shared interest or a shared goal. The model was for people to recognize their oneness in God and to commit to living out that oneness under him and by his leading. After years of civil war and infighting, look at how the people of Israel come back to that central realization here in chapter 5. It says, "Then all the tribes of Israel went to David at Hebron and told him, 'We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, when Saul was our king, you were the one who really led the forces of Israel. And the Lord told you, you will be the shepherd of my people Israel. You will be Israel's leader.' So there at Hebron, King David made a covenant before the Lord with all the elders of Israel, and they anointed him king of Israel." The leaders of each tribe recognized their oneness, that despite the things that would seek to divide them, they are from one family, and they remain one family. And in expressing this to David, they once again become one people, united for the season ahead for which God has prepared them and their leadership. This moment, it's not about negotiations or trade or power or authority. It's about recognizing the sovereignty of God who has called them to be one people united by virtue of belonging to him. So what do we see? They don't make a treaty. They don't make an accord where they retain their individual autonomy and they just choose to cooperate for a time. Instead of negotiating and leveraging for position, they come together under God. They form a covenant with one another and with God to once again walk in unity, to receive their identity as God's people and to cause that to be the deciding factor in how they're going to work together, not as allies, but as a family. It can be difficult for us to trust others. There are many reasons why we struggle with that. Maybe some of those have even come up around your tables as you've been sharing this morning. Be reminded today that we don't make a commitment to one another as a church family because of what we can do for each other. We make a commitment because we understand our identity as God's people, called for his purposes, and the need for us to walk together as a family of faith. We commit to walking together as a church in seasons of joy and in seasons of challenge, when we're getting along and when we're being sharpened. In some seasons we're being served, and in some seasons we are there to serve others. We've been called together, You're called into this community. God establishes His church for His purposes. You are not here by accident. We function as a family because of our shared identity. Christ has made us brothers and sisters under one Father, and we belong to one another. And so our response is to commit to walking with one another in all seasons as a family, to see the kingdom come among us and to carry the kingdom into the world with us. What does your next step of commitment look like? Is it signing up to serve somewhere? Is it joining a growth group? Is it pursuing church membership at the next stage? What will you do with what the Spirit is saying to you today about what it looks like to make a commitment to this church